All right, Nick, let's talk about the USC Trojans. Trojans, I think they did a lot of good things at the end of this season. I think they finished strong, but you look at what they did in the recruiting game, especially, they came out and were able to do a lot of really good things in the recruiting game. There are a lot of other highlights through other teams in the league, but I think the Trojans in particular, they got passed over and people didn't know exactly how many great moves they made. Before we get into that, I'm Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, Nick, as I was alluding to, some great recruiting moves this past signing day for the Trojans at the end of the season. Let's hop on into it and we can cover those, and I'll hear your take on these on the other side. These are both from the great Hayes Fawcett over on X. Very good follow for all the recruiting news. I know he had a ton of information for the early signing period in the last few days this week. But first one says, breaking five-star defensive lineman Jakeem Thanos, great nickname, Stewart, has committed to USC, he tells me, for @On3 Recruits. The 6'6", 290-pound defensive lineman from Reserve, Louisiana, chose the Trojans over Oregon and LSU. Says time to make history, dog work, and then something I have no idea what he was trying to say there. The second one is class of 2025 cornerback Alex Graham flipped his commitment from Colorado to USC. He tells me @On3 Recruits. The 6'1", 185 cornerback from Detroit, Michigan has been committed to the Buffaloes since April. Says God's plan, fight on. I think that one in particular is very interesting, seeing the Deion Sanders effect at Colorado, being able to steal a DB from them. Great news for the Trojans. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this one, Nick. But before we get to you, Trojans fans, in the comment section below, I think there's a lot of good this season. I think there's a lot to build off of, but end of the regular season comes to a head. Let's take a quick look back before we progress on any further and tell us who was your MVP of the season. I think there's a lot of good. I think we saw a lot of good things switch up at the end of the season, but let us know who is your MVP in the comment section below. But nonetheless, Nick, what do you think about these latest moves for the Trojans?
Yeah, I think you hit on a very interesting point there in your opening. The fact that it's being glossed over a little bit. USC Trojans are quietly having a really good post regular season recruiting run. We're hearing a lot of noise from the Michigans, from the Ohio States, from the Oregon Ducks, and things like that. Programs doing well. The Florida Gators, deservedly so. They're doing a nice job. But the USC Trojans, honestly, with the quality of recruit they're getting right now, and especially with those two reports you mentioned, are absolutely crushing it. And this is what is very interesting about this time of year. We talk about it a lot on this channel, is that sometimes the teams that have disappointing programs, the blue bloods that didn't quite work out, the USC is obviously a great example of that this year. It can be a tough time recruiting wise because your competition, like Oregon, for example, they're playing for a national title, they're getting into the playoff. Even though you have more energy supposedly to recruit kids, it's hard to recruit against a team that's playing on Saturdays and playing for a championship when you're not. It means you have to be better at a sales pitch. It means you have to be more methodical. You have to be more deliberate. And Lincoln Riley and his staff absolutely are proving it here. I love the flip from Colorado too. Obviously, the five-star tackle Thanos there. This is two great moves by the USC Trojans, and I think a lot of people are sleeping on USC right now. I think we look at this past season, kind of a weird year. It just kind of went off the rails physically a little bit there during different points of the season. They should have beat Michigan. I think that loss, giving up that long run at that point early in the year, I think turned things into a downward spiral. They could never really figure out quarterback. I think that'll be solved going into the future. I think we covered that about a week or so ago with their latest big commit when it comes to that position. I think the USC Trojans are 100% heading in the right direction. And again, it takes time. I know people want to see these big name coaches come in and turn their programs immediately in to back to 12-0, 13-0, winning national titles. The reality is that's not the case. Nick Saban, his first year at Alabama, they were terrible. They lost to University of Louisiana Monroe. His second year, they were actually pretty good until they got to the bowl game when they were wrecked. They were obliterated by Utah, I believe, in the Sugar Bowl, right? It took a couple years for Nick Saban, the greatest coach of all time, at the heart of SEC country, Alabama, with all the resources they have, to turn it around. It will take Lincoln Riley a similar kind of effect. The Caleb Williams kind of transition era kind of paused it a little bit. I know it was exciting to see Williams, but I think the reality is I think that hurt USC's transition because they didn't want to go in full rebuild and reload because they already had Williams, who's such a great player. They kind of did what they could with him. It pushed the rebuild back a few years into 2024. That's what we saw. This past year would have been what had occurred Lincoln Riley's first year had Caleb Williams not been there. Now that we got that out of the way, we're seeing the recruiting, we're seeing the team building come into focus, and heading into 2025 and the future, this USC Trojans team is looking really good. In fact, right now, according to 24/7 Sports, they have in the 2025 class the 13th ranked class. And here's the thing right now, based on their rankings, which just take a total recruiting score, they have tied for the fewest commits in any of the top 15 teams on that list. What does that mean? Is that their top 15 was still having more ammunition to get more guys to sign and commit. Lincoln Riley, his staff doing a great job. Future is bright in Los Angeles.
Yeah, Nick, and I think other couple things about this recruiting class that they brought in is you mentioned it. They don't have a ton of recruits, and they're still ranked very highly, meaning they have a pretty good, level of recruit. They have a very good quality of recruit coming onto this team. A lot of really good players coming in, and I think how they did it is very interesting. Obviously, California is a big place. There's a lot of recruits to go around, so USC getting 5 recruits out of the state of California being their top, that's a given. This is a team that should dominate the state of California, and they do that. They got a lot of guys out of there. But when you think about their, second, third tier, involvement here, you'd think, okay, maybe they get some guys out of like Nevada, maybe they get some guys out of Washington, Oregon, keep that West Coast vibe going. No, what do? They dive hard into the heart of the SEC. They get 4 guys out of the state of Georgia. They get 3 guys out of the state of Texas. They get a guy out of the state of Florida. This is a recruiting class that I think kind of shows a little bit of dominance from Lincoln Riley and what that excitement about what he can bring to a program does. I love that he was able to go into SEC territory, mix things up, get a lot of recruits out of there as well. And then he kind of have a smattering all over the country, showing that they can go anywhere they need to do it. They got guys out of Louisiana, Maryland, Michigan, Missouri, Oklahoma, Utah, Virginia, Washington, as I said. This was just a very diverse area of recruiting class, showing that Lincoln Riley and his staff, they have a big bag. They can go to a lot of different places all over the country to get these recruits. I think that's a good sign for the future of this program because you're going to need to keep recruiting. Like you said, that Caleb Williams time kind of slowed down their rebuild, their reload, their progress. But I think we're seeing they have a good plan and they have the ability to go get great players all across the country.